Good to go. Good evening. Today is Wednesday, March 15th, 2023 at 6 p.m. We are in the Brecksville Broadview Heights Education Center, 6638 Mill Road, Brecksville. This is a meeting of the Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There is time for public participation during the meeting as an indicated agenda item. This meeting will be live streamed via YouTube and will also be recorded for later viewing. Please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel where all recordings are posted. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 1C, roll call.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mrs. Kwiatkowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Mack,
Yes.
Mrs. Wigman,
Yes.
Mr. Dosen.
Yes. Item 2 is the first hour tonight is a work session. We'll be going over policy and then financial audit. And just as a reminder, those board members who are on the policy committee are the only ones permitted to discuss policy. The other board members are just reviewing, or what's the word I'm looking for? We're spectators. We're not allowed to participate. So I'll turn it over to item 2A, review Neola legal alerts. I'm going to pass it off to the committee and I'll be quiet.
Good evening, Pat.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? All
I'm doing well.
right. You want to get us started? I think Tish and Kathleen both have their manuals to go through and we'll be asking any questions.
Okay, very good. This was quite the update. I think you certainly got your money's worth on this one. There are 3 components to this update. One is the regular policy update, volume 41, number 2. There are 2 specials in here. One deals with your tobacco policies, with some suggestions and some for revision, and this has been put together in consultation with folks from the Ohio Department of Health. We consult with them on a regular basis, and usually about every 3 years, there's enough content to bring forward as somewhat of a special update for you to consider. In this case, there is one statutory revision that you'll want to pay close attention to, but then also updating some of the definitions and a chance to revisit some of the options within the policy, particularly based on some of the terminology that is more widely used today. Also, the overarching concern with vaping and the use of aerosols by students as well as by adults, and the role the district may want to take with regard to that. Also, we've provided an update for you on some of your technology policies. The dynamic of change with technology is certainly one that occurs very quickly. It's not evolutionary, it's more revolutionary. And we feel it's important to go back and, again, update the terminology and deal with some of the changes that have occurred in that realm. Also in your packet, there are 2 legal alerts. One is sort of a legislative update. It's more commentary on what was left unfinished as a part of the December lame duck legislative session with regard to any change to 3rd grade reading guarantee. That guarantee remains in place as it has been for a number of years, although it is on the legislative agenda for sometime in the next 6 months for some potential for change there. The other legal alert is just some guidance for you, some thoughts to consider with regard to the emergence of the emotional support, comfort animal and therapy dogs in many public places, and certainly finding a place in a number of schools. So offer some guidance and some structure there. And also for those at client request, not that Neola is recommending that you open the doors to a lot of animals in the schools. We offer some policy guidance for you in terms of some options that we'll touch base on as we go through the update package. If I can suggest we start with the regular update, volume 41, number 2. There are a number of policies in there for you to consider, and I'll just run through them by the numbers and offer some thoughts about why it's in the packet and what you might want to do with that. The first one in there is bylaw 0131.1, technical corrections. This has to do with making some technical corrections to your policy collection. On a fairly regular basis, districts have to designate compliance officers, whether it's for Title IX, for non-discrimination, anti-harassment, or for bullying. All of those, and require that you designate at least one or more compliance officers. The Office for Civil Rights has long insisted that your policy identify those folks by name, not just position. Well, on a fairly regular basis, people either change positions or they leave the district. They go, some retire, some go to other places. But there's a fairly regular need to change the designation of compliance officers. And we've long argued with our legal counsel that it gets so cumbersome to have to do that as a policy revision, when in fact it really should be considered a technical correction that the board can approve by resolution instead of doing a first read, second read, and then an adoption. So if you opt to take this language, it would streamline your process for changing compliance officers as designated in policy. The next policy, 2114, meeting state performance indicators. I will point out, while you have this policy, it is not a required policy. And in fact, it has changed a number of times since your original adoption in 2007. The latest change, because this is based on the state report card, moved from letter grade designations to star designations. So your options are to update it, making reference to the stars utilized by the Ohio Department of Education, or to not have the policy at all. So we offer that for your consideration. Next is College Credit Plus, policy 2271. This also tends to be modified on a fairly regular basis. The latest change here comes because of a statutory change that added in protections for children of military families. It is intended to safeguard those students who, because of a change in military assignment, students participating in College Credit Plus must move with their parents and partway through the program, be left with either a financial obligation or a problem with grades and credits. This language is intended to safeguard those students from any penalty that would be imposed, not by the district necessarily, but by their inability to continue the program. Policy 2412, homebound instruction. This is a policy the district has. The changes to this policy deal with how it's frequently utilized That being with regard to a temporary IEP for an intermittent health impairment, whereby a student is unable to attend school because of a temporary health reason. An IEP is developed and services are provided with a home tutor. This updates the language with regard to that process. Next couple of policies deal with volunteers. 312009, 412009. We are suggesting that you delete these two policies and put volunteer structure into a new policy, 8120. The reason for that, and this being embedded in the employment section, volunteers really aren't employees of the district. But years ago, when these policies were originally developed, that's where it landed. And we're suggesting we move that over to the operations section, 8000s, whereby the board provides guidance and direction for non-employees of the district, be they contracted services, vendors, or in this case, volunteers. The reason this came up for consideration is a little unrelated to the classification, but rather a conversation we had probably 6 months ago when we reviewed policies. And it's evolved around the question, who needs to have a pupil activities permit with regard to those folks who are advisors, coaches, or assist in the district in some other capacity? And the Ohio Department of Education weighed in on this and simply said the district decides who needs to have that permit. From a liability perspective, that permit involves training for the advisor or the coach that really is intended to safeguard students. It provides the first aid, the CPR, the use of an AED, and all of the kinds of precautions you would want to have in place for an individual who is overseeing student activities. We recognize that sometimes those advisors are volunteers, and they always get considered a little differently than an employee. But there's another group that weighed in on this whole notion of volunteers, because while ODE said it's up to the district to decide what level of background screenings you want to do and what level of training and pupil activity licensure you want to require, the Ohio High School Athletic Association has a regulation that requires that any volunteer coach of an OHSAA sanctioned activity must have the pupil activities permit. So we added some language that allows you to implement that for those coaches, as well as for anyone who is overseeing an activity that involves regular physical exertion and activity, or may pose a health or safety risk, because those are the ones that you really would want to have the kind of training that would enable them to assist in a medical emergency. A volunteer coach for freshman football deals with a different level of activity than the volunteer advisor for, say, the chess club or the mock trial club activity. So we offer that for your consideration. Policy 5310, health services. We've upgraded some language. We've included the requirements that you face with regard to concussion protocol and who can return a student to regular activity, be it an athletic activity on the field, on the court, or physical education class in the gymnasium or in the classroom. Policy 5460, graduation requirements. This has certainly changed a number of times over the last several years, and I suspect will continue to do so. But we had responded to a number of statutory changes as well as ODE changes with some phase-in language. We believe now is the appropriate time to remove the phase-in language. The dust appears to have settled with regard to Ohio Department of Education guidance, and we offer some suggestions for you on graduation requirements. I will tell you that it likely will come back up as a part of the legislative considerations, if not in the next 6 months, certainly in the next 12. Some of the language has changed. There's reference to competency and readiness requirements. And this policy revision reflects all of the recent ODE guidance that has been issued. Additionally, we have a number of administrative guidelines that address graduation-related activities. And we can touch base on those briefly when we get there, but with regard to an honors diploma, credit flex requirements for that program, and diploma seals. Policy 5610. This deals with the removal, suspension, expulsion, and permanent exclusion of students. There are two things that were timely for revision in this particular policy. It was last updated in August of 2020. And at that time, we had some phase-in language that dealt with restrictions on discipline for students in pre-K to 3. That phase-in has occurred, so we can eliminate the phase-in language. There's also a provision in that policy that harkens back a number of years. If a student has been expelled from a district other than yours and applies for enrollment in the Brecksville Broadview Heights City Schools, you can consider whether you admit that student or not. You do not have to accept a student who has been expelled from another district in Ohio. Minimally, you must provide for a hearing. Your current language states that that hearing has to be before the board, but there is no longer any statutory requirement that that occur before the board. Certainly the board can hear that if they choose to, but typically that is designated to the superintendent or the superintendent's designee who hears those kinds of disciplinary hearings. Next policy is 6325, procurement with federal funds. This is just a minor change dealing with the Davis-Bacon prevailing wage requirement. If you have a construction project that you are using federal dollars to pay for, and that project exceeds $2,000, the feds require that you pay prevailing wage. And when they first enacted this regulation, it was for any and all construction projects. In their latest compliance supplement, they softened that language as there were many federal funding programs that were being made available to school districts and other public entities over the last couple of years with the ESSER, ARP, GEAR, and other funding programs offered by the federal government. So we modified the language. If the specific program requires prevailing wage, then that's what you must follow. So there's a little bit of leeway there, but it's based simply on the requirements of the federal program. Next policy, 8390, animals on district property. If you wish to allow for not service animals, you're required to provide for service animals. But if you wish to allow for therapy dogs, comfort animals, and others, then a number of clients have asked for some policy guidance dealing with those therapy and comfort animals. Note that on the template that we offered you, this is not something that Neola is strongly recommending or advocating for. In fact, if anything, we caution you on how you approach this. However, if you're going to allow for a range of animals to be in the schools, we think you need to do so through policy and to provide some structure so that students and the animals they bring with them are dealt with consistently. Again, it is not a required policy, and happy to entertain questions that you may have. The next couple of policies are ones that I would encourage you to take a look at. They are time sensitive, and they deal with critical functions of the district. 8400 school safety. We have updated this once again to reflect changes in House Bill 123 that has requirements for threat assessment teams and training. That bill goes into full force and effectiveness this month. Also, there has been a change in who you report to with your school safety plan, your emergency operations management directives. And instead of reporting to the Ohio Department of Education, you report to the Ohio Department of Public Safety. Also, there have been some changes in the numbers and the kinds of safety drills that must be conducted. So all of this you can find in policy 8400 as well as in policy 8420 that reflect the changes of statute as well as the Ohio Administrative Code with regard to the number and type of drills and your reporting requirements for those. The last policy in this collection, 8462, student abuse and neglect. It reflects the changes that we got in the lame duck legislative session that now require K-12 student training on child sex abuse prevention. Additionally, there is training that is required for staff, and they specify the kinds of training and the qualifications of trainers that must be utilized in providing that. Questions on that group?
Yes. So, Pat, just so I'm clear, with the rescinding of the 2 volunteer policies that you're recommending, removing the new volunteer policies to the 8,000.
Correct.
Because why again?
The 8,000 section of your policy collection deals with district operations, and volunteers would fall into that category more readily than they would into the employment category.
Okay.
We have them numbered as in the 3,000s, which is your instructional staff. And then the 4,000s also is the support staff. And volunteers really don't fit into either of those 2 categories.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I just needed to hear it again because I feel like it didn't register.
Several people asked about it and we said, well, no, they're not employees, so they shouldn't be in there.
Okay. And then the reason that we're rescinding that you guys are recommending rescinding those is because we have to have that new policy that includes the language about the activity permit.
Correct.
Okay. The policy that you guys are recommending has language in it that says that the cost of obtaining the permit is going to fall at the volunteer's expense.
You have a choice as to whether you make that at the volunteer's expense or your expense.
Okay. I just wanted to.
And then
That's an option.
Okay.
just to reiterate to the board, I asked Craig to do some due diligence on that. So even if we have a first read, we can change that at the next meeting if we wanted. I asked 4 questions, and hopefully we'll have that information and be able to decide that.
Okay. Okay, that was really all the questions that I had. Well, wait, the school safety,
Yes.
and this might be more for Joelle and Craig. we have current threat assessment teams, right, at every building. And is this policy going to require more training for them? Or will it be, it'll be the same training that they are provided already?
Yeah, so all of our threat assessment teams went to an 8-hour training already. It has been reported to the state that,
Yeah.
because we had a report that we were going to training, and they've already been meeting and doing this regularly since the start of the school year. So they don't require any additional training unless it needs to be updated every year.
Are they compensated for that, or is that just held like during a part of their regular work
Part of the regular-
schedule and work day? Okay. All right. That was all the questions that I have.
On that particular topic, Joelle and Craig, you will note that in the administrative guidelines, we did a rewrite on the threat assessment guideline. In fact, we offered you two, and the process is virtually the same. We took a look at the training models that Ohio districts were using. And depending on which training model you use, there are two predominant. One is CSTAG, which is the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines. And the other is NTAC, which comes out of the Department of Homeland Security and is the National Threat Assessment Consortium. So one of those guidelines that best meets the training and the protocol that you have in place. Really, the only difference is that if you trained with Navigate 360, they train on CSTAG, and they have 3 risk assessment levels that you work with. If you trained on the NTAC model, they have 4 levels of risk that they assess. So that's the key difference there. And you're welcome to choose either or neither of those guidelines and simply utilize your training protocols.
Thank you.
Mr. Corbett, I'm looking at 8390. So we have a therapy dog currently at our elementary. I'm looking for where the line was. It was something about insurance. Is there something specific in that one, or did I see it somewhere else about the district has to obtain insurance?
I don't believe we included insurance in the policy language itself.
Okay.
However, I would certainly recommend that you consult with your liability carrier for that kind of coverage.
Do you have insurance?
So I think that was something that Mr. Code did, but we're going to be doing our policy renewal, so I'll double check
Okay.
to make sure that that's included.
Oh, it is right there. Okay. So more on the therapy dog as well. Like, what kind of training? Is it specific to what kind of training the person has to have? That's managing the dog?
I think that's what you have to determine, what level of certification, training, vaccination. There are a lot of things to consider when you open the doors and allow dogs and other animals to come in. We see them virtually everywhere, every public place we go anymore.
Yeah.
And they may have a harness or a brightly colored bandana, but I think especially when you're exposing a number of children to animals, you want to know as much about that animal as you can know, and certainly apply those criteria consistently.
Yeah. What you have a good lay of the land as far as, so this is a very general policy. It's a first swipe at this. This is the first time I've seen a policy of this nature. Is that correct? So it's going to be very broad, correct?
Yes, correct.
So as things might occur, we'll start seeing it narrow, right?
And you may change your mind on what all you want to permit. Now, you have no choice as to service animals. And there's criteria in there that allows for you to remove a service animal.
Yeah.
But all of the rules around service animals are different than those that come to bear with therapy dogs, comfort animals, those kinds of things.
Have you seen, like, when you are speaking to other boards about therapy dogs, like, is there anything enlightening that you're seeing? Any overlying,
I'm surprised at how many just, yes, without a policy, we've just let them in.
Okay.
And I think that's in response to concern for students' mental health, as well as for your employees' mental health. And I think the impacts of COVID have brought us to the widespread nature of this mechanism.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mhm. If we can go to the tobacco policies next. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 policies, 1 guideline. Actually, we're changing the title to better reflect what I think is our position on tobacco, and that's prohibiting the use of tobacco at schools, not promoting the use. So the use of tobacco title we have changed to a prohibition. Key pieces within the 6 policies is making sure that the definitions that we provide are consistent. We took a look at a number of resources and settled on the definition provided by the Public Health Law Center, which is based in Minneapolis. It was recommended to us by one of the agencies we've worked with and generally preferred by the folks at the Ohio Department of Health, as well as some others. I would let you know right up front that several years ago, the Ohio Department of Health had a campaign where they went out and graded school districts on their tobacco policies. And they awarded either letter grades or certificates, whatever. They want an awful lot more in your policy than you are required to do by state law. So you will see in that template a number of options for you to consider. I don't try to legislate to you. I try to advise you as to things that you need to think about. So the options are all things that the Ohio Department of Health would like you to include in your policy. And I really don't take issue with them. It's just a question of how much reach are you, do you have the capacity to have on this? And that's a decision only you can make. In policy 5512, would call your attention to the additional training requirements on the harmful effects of tobacco, nicotine, and electronic smoking devices. Has to be a part of the health education curriculum. That is required by House Bill 110 and is now in effect. And I think you probably already do that, but it is now a statutory requirement. We've built it into the policy. 7434 is the policy that prevails over the general public. And we wanted to be sure that the definitions included there and the provisions that you consider for advertising and other purposes are consistent across the board with employment categories as well as the general public. And finally, policy 9160 does have a reference. It deals with public attendance at school events. It has a reference to the tobacco prohibition. So we wanted to be sure that the definition you had there was consistent with the definition you had in the other policies. Questions on any of those?
I guess my only question is, you have to have a separate policy for each. There's no way to consolidate them.
Well, we are in the process of looking at that. what you'll note is with each of those three categories, the language is the same. We eliminated reference to support staff, instructional staff, administrators. We called it all employees. But for now, since you have separate sections of your manual that deals with separate categories of employment, I think you would do well to make sure that it's in each one of those three sections.
Okay.
We are working on a project that could have us consolidate your employment policies into one section.
Okay, thank you.
If we can look quickly at the technology policies, these are ones that I would suggest you turn over to your tech folks, have them go through them and give you some feedback with the changes they feel are appropriate to make. Much of the change in these policies is bringing language up to current day. These were last reviewed overall, I think, in 2019. And in some cases, our policies from 2019 withstand the test of time. But in the technology arena, no sooner do we publish a set of examples of tech platforms or apps than it changes. So we've gone through and tried to modernize the language in a couple of cases, and I'll call your attention to three that are very much hands-on with technology. Your web accessibility policy 7540.02. Strongly suggest you take a look at that. That's the one that the Office for Civil Rights will be examining your website to be sure that you meet the proper level of technical accessibility for individuals with disabilities. The others that you use regularly would be 7540.03, student technology acceptable use and safety, and then staff technology acceptable use and safety. We've brought those up to current standard. We also have revised two forms for your use, where you typically have students and staff every year sign off on the fact that they have read the regulations with regard to their being on the district's technology resources site, and they agree to abide by the standards that you set for their use. Three other policies that are there. I'm sorry, let's see. Three others deal with your organization's readiness for cybersecurity, information management, and overall your continuity of organizational operations planning. Right now, the only one that you're required to have is 8315, information management, which deals with the litigation hold requirements that you have on maintaining documents. The others, you will be asked questions very soon. I believe the Auditor of State will be asking, what is your plan for securing your site, your facilities, your information? In other words, what is your organizational operations plan for when something happens, whether it's a hack, whether it's a power outage and your system goes down? What backup measures do you have in place for maintaining the integrity of the data and information that you collect and store? So those would be important to take a look at. The last one in that bunch, 9700.01, may seem a little bit out of place, advertising and commercial activities, but it comes back and deals with the use of the district website. Many of our Ohio clients utilize a service that for their athletic department that maintains schedules, provides updates on scores and athletic activities, and they operate this site for the district. Well, part of what they do though is accept advertisements. And you have a responsibility to screen advertising. This would allow a little bit of leeway in how you review. Sometimes it's going to be after the fact because they change advertisements on a very regular basis. So recognizing the practices that were in place, we tried to provide you some policy guidance and some protections for how you might interact with that service. A lot to digest. I would suggest that you take the 41 number 2 update, particularly the school safety items, and move forward with those. Certainly you have time to deal with the tobacco as well as the technology. So if you need to take it in 3 segments, we packaged it that way so that you would have an opportunity to digest it and make informed decisions.
Any additional questions?
The technology, thought I had it on, sorry. The district web accessibility coordinator and the one, is that Ms. Tomasetti? Because when you look at the cross out, it's our section 504 coordinator. Is that who we would have as that in that role?
We had our tech departments, our tech director actually review this policy before putting it before you. And
Okay.
our communications director actually manages our website. So it's probably going to be one of those 2 people.
Okay, I was just, when I read, I think I got confused because I saw, yeah, okay. So it would be a tech,
Mhm.
tech staff member, okay. All right.
Any additional questions? No. Thank you, Pat.
It's a pleasure to join you. I hope to do it in person next time.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
We're gonna, sorry, we're gonna move on to work session item 2C, financial audit update.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us here tonight. I'm Chad Fido. I was the partner in charge of the audit this year. Tim Harold was the supervisor and day-to-day in charge.
Thank you.
He's passing out our financial reports. Oops,
Yeah.
sorry. So typically what we do when we go over the audit is we just briefly go through the key audit reports. We don't really talk about the financial statements too much, but obviously if there's any questions, please feel free to ask them at any time. All right, I'm gonna let Tim jump into the reports.
Just as a reminder for the board, so it's Kathleen and I are on the committee, so the other board members are only observing.
All right, so we're going to start with the bounded copy. And we're going to start on page 1. It's, I think, about the 3rd page in. And this report is going to be the independent auditor's report that starts your financial statements. Just to sum it up, it's going to present the responsibilities of management that you guys are responsible for providing the financial statements that we are auditing. Our responsibilities in providing an opinion on those financial reports based on our audit. And at the very first section, that is where the actual opinion is. This year's audit was an unmodified opinion, which in our audit world, that means it's completely clean, no issues, nothing to that extent. Just a lot of verbiage in here. The other thing about the independent auditor's opinion is going to bring up that it is a single audit, which means you had over $750,000 in federal expenditures that you spent during the fiscal year. And that's actually going to be the next section we are going to cover. And it's just, and we'll get into exactly how that went as well. So that's going to be at the back. It's going to be start at page 83. So this first report's going on page 83 is going to be talking about our auditing or the government auditing standards over internal controls. We do not opine on internal controls over the financial audits, but we will review them as they come up in our audit. There's some couple definitions over what significant deficiencies, material weaknesses are as far as internal controls are presented. As I said, based on the opinion, it was completely unmodified. There are no findings of that nature in this report whatsoever. So if you turn to page 85, sure can.
The other thing in this report is our report on compliance. So under government auditing standards, we're required to test direct and material compliance requirements. That would be compliance with the ORC, with board policies, contracts, things like that. And if we found any material non-compliance, it would be reported in this report. There was none.
So going on to page 85, this is going to be our letter actually discussing directly the single audits and our auditing standards based on the uniform guidance. It's going to, first section is just going over each major program for the federal program that we did audit and discussing our opinion on those programs. Once again, these were unmodified. We had no issues with any of our testing. And it's touching on compliance again, just like on the previous page, except for this time, the compliance it's referring to is based on the federal standards that each program has based on their own requirements on that. Once again, this would, if there was any findings or any issues that we would have found during the audit, this is the report letter that it would have been under that you guys would have found it. But once again, clean audit, nothing to show on there. Anything?
No, just the only difference with this report and the previous one is the uniform guidance requires us to test internal controls over compliance. So that report, we actually did test internal controls, and obviously, as Tim said, it was clean, no issues in internal control.
All right, and then we're going to jump over to page 88 real briefly. So page 88 is going to be the actual federal schedule that has been submitted and filed as part of the audit, and it just lists all the federal expenditures that were reported during fiscal year 22. Based on this report, we can go to page 90. Page 90 is the schedule of findings and question costs. This is going to be one of the best tools to use when you're looking at one of these financial statements, regardless of who the auditors are, because it basically goes down exactly how the audit went and how what was found. So you can see that the financial statement opinion is unmodified, as I was saying. There's no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies, no material non-compliance, and that the federal schedule audit as well as the financial statement was unmodified. Down near the bottom, you'll see the major programs we tested. This year, we tested the continuing use of the Education Stabilization Fund that was part of the CARES Act, as well as the nutrition program for all the school lunches and everything to that nature. Once again, just to reiterate, this audit went very smooth, no issues there. And that is all we need to cover on the big packet, unless you guys have any questions on it.
Okay, the only other thing I'll add here, there's another packet report to those charged with governance. Before I go through that, I will add, if you've been through these before, you may be used to seeing a management letter. A management letter is our way of communicating immaterial non-compliance or control recommendations that don't rise to the level of going in the audit report. There's no management letter, so we had none of those to communicate either. So that's a very good thing. The report to those charged with governance, this is required by auditing standards just to communicate to the board basically everything we kind of went through tonight. It outlines our responsibilities, the school district's responsibilities, whether there are any significant or unusual transactions where there were not, whether there were any audit adjustments or uncorrected misstatements. There were none of those, so we did not have to make any adjustments to the financial statements, and we did not have to propose any adjustments that were immaterial and not corrective. There were no disagreements with management. As far as consultations with other accountants, so the school district does consult with the local government services department of the Auditor of State's office to help prepare the GAAP financial statements. There were no significant issues, no significant difficulties. Yeah, really, that's it. So we can open it up to any questions or comments or.
I mean, it looks clean as a whistle, so
Yeah.
not much to delve into. Just another question, which is, are these reports available electronically or are they posted somewhere that we can?
Yeah, so the reason we waited to present this is our audit goes through a desk review process with the Auditor of State's office before it becomes public record. They have gone through that desk review and had no changes to our report. So these are available on the Auditor of State's website. That would be the bound package, the report to charged with governance. That's just for you guys. That's not on the website.
Okay, so just internally, Craig, maybe we can put a link.
That's linked on our website.
Oh, it is?
Yep.
Okay. Can we put a link also in this agenda item? That
Sure.
way, if somebody goes to it, they can pull that up. Okay. Great. I don't, do you have any?
No.
Kathleen?
I guess we keep Mr. Yanagos.
Yeah, I guess.
I guess so.
Yeah.
No, and I did explain, we've had this internal conversation. So we've had 5 years of Ray and Associates, 3 years since I've been here. And I say unfortunately, but we'll hopefully have a good experience with the Auditor of State's office. But this will be the last year that we will have Ray and Associates here. The Auditor of State's office is taking us back for audit next year. I'm depressed about it, but hopefully it'll be good. No, they've done a great job. They're very easy to work with, both and their audit team that they bring here. So I know my staff is very sad to see them go, but maybe we'll at some point be back in the future. So
Definitely, we've always enjoyed working with Craig and his team. It's a great audit, and we're sad to see it go too. But again, hopefully we'll have another opportunity.
we have no control over it. None.
Most things. So, there you go.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank you,
everyone. Have a good
gentlemen.
evening.
Thank you.
too. All right, well, it's 6:53, so I don't want to start the meeting so we're gonna do a little pause so that we'll start our regular agenda at 7. So if anybody needs a bio break or whatever, just go on pause. You ready? Are we live? Okay. All right, thank you, everyone. We are reconvening at 7 o'clock. We're going to start the agenda for our normal meeting. Prior to this, we had a work session that ended a little early. So we're moving on to item 3, President's announcements. The only thing I'm going to mention is Craig. I spoke with Craig earlier today. He's gotten in, if you recall, we were discussing what we're doing with Hilton, and the board gave direction to get pricing on demolishing Hilton and timing and things of that nature. So Craig got some of that information back. We also wanted to get additional information for a discussion, such as how much is the operational cost to keep the building online, month to month. I know there was some talk earlier about hitting pause on the demolition and looking at, potentially holding onto that building if we needed more space, depending on kindergarten enrollment, preschool, that type of thing. So the idea will be hopefully that next month we can have a more informed discussion. So we'll need to work with Craig on what information we need. I had spoken to him earlier about also getting some type of, not necessarily spending a lot of money, but getting some type of insight as to what it would cost to potentially renovate either part of the building, the whole building, for additional use. Because as you all recall, when we went out to the bond issue, those buildings were in pretty bad shape. And up until the construction of the new elementary. We did the minimal amount to those buildings just to keep them safe and operational, but we didn't do anything crazy. And of course, now that we've opened the new building, we've not been doing anything to them. So anyway, the idea will be next month, we'll put an agenda item on. We'll have a discussion about what the board would like to do with Hilton. And let's work with Craig on requesting information that we think we need. And Craig can send us out the updates of some of the information we have. And let's also request whatever we think we need so that we can make a decision next April in our April meeting for what we want to do with Hilton. And just for everybody's reminder out in the public, the board has already voiced that we do not intend to sell Hilton, the property or the building. We're retaining it. It's part of our larger district here where the board offices are in middle school and high school. The question is, what do we do with the building? The original plan when we went out for the bond issue was to demolish all 4 buildings, elementaries. As it is, we sold Chippewa. We sold Highland, or we're done selling Highland, almost done selling Highland. We collaborated with the city of Brecksville to, in essence, trade them Central School for the property at Blossom. So we've disposed of 3 of our old school buildings, and the last one is Hilton, which again is remaining as part of our campus. We just need to decide what we want to do with it. So look at having continuing that conversation next month. Item 4, board appointments. I just had an exchange with Mr. Gilbride. He's out of town, so he didn't have any updates. And I don't think we have any legislative updates. Okay, so we're going to move on to item 5, superintendent committees, financial liaison audit committee. If you were with us during our work session, we just got our audit presented and it was stellar, absolutely clean, no issues found. And we will put a link out there for anybody who wants to look into the final audit report. We'll put it into the agenda item, which was item 2C, financial audit update. We'll post a link in there. So anyone in the public who wants to pull up the audit, they can see how well we did. So congratulations, Craig, on a clean audit, and our staff. It's always good to see no findings. The next item would be Permanent Improvement Committee, Ellen and myself. Want to say anything?
No updates, but we will be having a meeting next month.
Okay. Board Policy Committee, Kathleen and Tish. And again, that was, we just had a session, work session on it, but you guys want to comment at all?
No, there were a lot of updates, and look for that next.
I mean, there's 20 recommended update,
Yeah.
over 20 recommended updates, and probably 3 that we're gonna need to handle pretty quickly.
Yep.
So
Okay, so stay
that will be in
tuned.
an agenda, yeah, at some point.
Okay. Transportation Appeals Committee, myself, we've had no appeals, which is good. Safety and Security Report, Brittany and Tish.
No updates at this time.
Schools Foundation Report, Brittany.
Also no update at this time. Thank you.
PSO Report, Ellen.
The last PSO council meeting was March 2nd. The next meeting is April 6th here in this room at 9:30 a.m. The middle school musical is this weekend. It's they're performing Matilda the Musical Junior this Saturday at 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. and Sunday at 2 p.m. And tickets can be purchased via the link on the middle school PSO Facebook page or at the door. The elementary school PSO approved the executive board slate for next school year, and we'll be looking for committee chairs soon. Coin Wars finished up last week. I'm not sure what Coin Wars is exactly, but it's a fundraiser that apparently collected over $10,000 for books and media center resources at that elementary school. And from the high school PSO, the only update is that they are working on filling board committees for the 2023-2024 school year also. So that's it for tonight.
Great, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item 6, superintendent's announcements. Joelle.
Thank you. Just a couple of reminders. We have our Take Back Togetherness Night, which is Monday, March 20th. And as you know, that's a night where we cancel everything. No practices, no homework, no anything. And the idea of that is to spend an enjoyable evening with your family. We encourage no technology that night. Put down your phones, have conversations, play some games, go out to dinner. And so we do that a couple times a year. So our next one for this year is Monday, March 20th. I'd also like to congratulate many of our students who did some wonderful things over the winter. We have our gymnastics team who won their 20th consecutive state title. And we had several of our wrestlers qualify at state, our robotics team, our speech and debate. And because we have so many kids who did wonderful things, we are having a parade of champions tomorrow. It's going to start at the high school. And after we parade through the high school, the kids are going to get on a bus. They're going to go down to the middle school, parade through the middle school, and then on to the elementary school to parade through the elementary school. So we're very excited to be able to do that and showcase all of our wonderful students. Thank you.
Great, wonderful.
What is I wanted to ask the event that's like, act like it's the 90s where there's no phones. Are you familiar with that? I saw something like that on Facebook that was being advertised for, nobody knows. Okay. I thought it was a brilliant idea, but yeah, okay.
All right, item 7, treasurer's announcements. Craig.
So just a quick thing on House Bill 1 as we continue to talk about this. Mrs. Kramer and I had a conversation with Senator Dolan. Again, I would encourage, although it sounds like he is opposed to this legislation in particular, and probably Mr. Robinson as well, please educate yourselves on House Bill 1. This is the intended, not really the intended effect, I guess, but it's a $929 million tax increase for residents and agricultural property taxpayers. It's $157 million annual tax decrease for businesses and commercial property taxpayers. And it's $538 million in annual decreases for local tax revenues. That's school, local governments, libraries, things like that. I've attached some of these analysis, I guess, that is available for people to look at. So I'm not going to go through these, but there's a full analysis that's available from the LSC that kind of like breaks this down at the government level. And the reason why we're talking about this is just because we're obviously very concerned about the actual loss to our district. So as it was actually introduced, they have determined that House Bill 920, which is a part of our state constitution, and I don't know why, there we go, maybe. This is actually the ramifications for our district at Brecksville Broadview Heights. And so it affects inside millage. And what that means for us is that we would lose, this number here is actually $597,000. That would be how much money we would lose in actual real estate revenue every single year. That is a relatively devastating number when you compile that over a 5-year forecast. And then this column here is the increase to taxpayers. So it would cost the residents of Brecksville and Broadview Heights an additional $2.6 million throughout the two communities. And I don't know how this is going to go, but if this passes, this is bad for local governments, it's bad for schools, and probably bad for residents as well. So please educate yourself, call your senators, your legislators, explain some of these ramifications. This is a little bit interesting for us to be going down this path, but I think they originally thought that House Bill 920 would not apply, and that's like a floor that is again in the state constitution. But because it does apply and it is in the constitution, this is what would happen if it passes in its current state or form. So again, I will continue to update this monthly if there are changes to this law as it goes through the process. I'll keep everyone posted, but I posting information as we kind of see it, and then you can digest it as well at your own leisure back home in looking at some of these analyses.
So just to be clear, the increase in local property tax cost, that increase is not funneling to the school systems.
Correct.
So while funding in the current proposed legislation, while funding for our school district would drop by almost $600,000, our residents would see an increase in property taxes, but that won't go to us. And so you know, when the state passes legislation and budgets that remove funding from us, there's no place else to go get that money other than taxpayers. You know, basically, school districts have two options. You either control expenses, which we have control over, right? Which mostly school systems are personnel. So it's mostly firing people to reduce expenses or reduction in force. The only way to increase revenue is to go back out to the voters for an operating levy. So in this particular case, if our school district lost, if this legislation goes through and we lose $600,000 a year, 1 mil, when you look at tax levies, like a 5.9 tax levy, operating levy, 1 mil in our district is worth about $1 million. So it's pretty simple. So losing $600,000 would be, to replace that money, would be like going out on the ballot and asking for a 0.6 mil tax increase. But of course, when that goes into effect, that would be permanent. It would be every year you'd be paying that. So so 0.6 may not sound like a lot, but we're trying to be as fiscally responsible with taxpayers' dollars as possible. And so we manage our budget to try to extend the time frame between going back out to the public and asking for additional operating funds. And when something like this happens, if it does go through, that's an impact on our budget there was no way to plan for. There's no way 3 years ago to know that the legislature might decide to take $600,000 out of our state income. So anyway, so educate yourself, and also, let your state legislatures know how you feel, because not only will your taxes go up, but our school system will lose funding, which will accelerate how quickly we need to come back out to our voters and ask for additional operating money.
I just wanted to add something, and this is, Matt Dolan used to be the senator for Brecksville and Broadview Heights, but when the state redistricted last year, he's now only the state senator for Broadview Heights. Brecksville's state senator is Jerry Serino. So there's an additional, like if you live in Broadview Heights, reach out to Phil Robinson or Matt Dolan. But if you live in Brecksville, it would be Phil Robinson or Jerry Serino. So.
Okay,
That's it.
very good. All right, item 8, community communications, 8A, hearing of the public. Hearing of the public, I assume we do have people, yes. A hearing of the public, persons, and please pay attention to this. Persons wishing to address the Board of Education may do so at this point. No formal action will be taken on subjects that are not included on this agenda until the board has had an opportunity to study them. Comments regarding personnel must be submitted in writing through the office of the superintendent. In order for the board to complete the planned agenda in an effective and efficient manner and to provide sufficient opportunities for members of the public to be heard, hearing of the public shall be limited to a maximum of 60 minutes, during which each speaker shall be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes. So just to frame that in, anybody wishing to be heard, first of all, you have to sign up and register, fill out a card so you can come up and speak. You state your name and your address. You have 3 minutes. I'm going to put a timer on. We're trying to be fair and equitable. We're trying to treat everybody the same, no matter who you are. If you're speaking and you go over 3 minutes, my timer is going to go off and I'm just going to let it keep beeping. So please just try to be respectful and wrap up your comments. And then finally, this is not your opportunity to dialogue with the board. This is not a question and answer. So if your prepared comments have questions for us, don't expect us to respond, because that's not what this is. This is hearing of the public. Okay.
Jan Lucas is first.
Yeah, if you would go up to the podium, and is that on? Okay. It's green, it's on.
It's green, it's on.
Yep.
I'm Jan Lucas, and I reside at 7684 Winding Way in Brecksville. And I'd like to start with a quote from a professional journal by a Brecksville Broadview Heights School staff member. Quote, "As teachers, connections lead us to feel valued, loved, and understood. They also give us a sense of belonging. So when you develop a connection with your students, run with it. Relationships are the foundation for everything. Creating lessons that intentionally put an effort into building those relationships, whether students want it or not, is what should drive learning in your classroom," unquote. So is it also the teacher's job to befriend students by sharing their personal pronouns with their students, and to use feelings-based learning techniques. Our school emotional intelligence surveys overreach into family rights to privacy. Aren't academics and analytical skills what we thought kids were learning? It's our duty to minimize, not to promote, societal obsession with sexual excess and gender confusion. Adult abuse of impressionable children is a problem in our schools. Our school authorities insist that, quote, they have no sex ed curriculum here because there are no state standards, unquote. But on the 2022 Ohio Department of Education sex ed compliance audit, our school system answered, quote, using our district health curriculum, our health education teachers instructed students on venereal disease and sexual education, unquote. No mention of the state standard of abstinence until marriage. And which is it? Is there a curriculum or is there not a curriculum? I'm not asking a question of you. On the website protectingohiochildren.net, I read an article that targets Brecksville Broadview Heights schools with covert sexual education practices. 50 local parent responses to a survey said their children were exposed to explicit sexual material by a teacher, sports coach, school nurse, guidance counselor, other students, or an after-school club. 9 parents responded that they had discovered a secret gender plan for their child at school. Material covered by staff were abortion, sexual orientation, sex toys, putting a gender plan together without parent knowledge, pronouns, medical transition, masturbation, and prostitution. The most prominent age of exposure was 13. It's apparent that our administrators, educators, and staff facilitate subtle messaging that is insinuated into school environment. They implement government and foundation-funded social programs that endanger children and undermine parental authority. This must stop, and we want it out of our schools. We want a
10
board and a
seconds.
superintendent who focus on academic excellence and stop using our kids as pawns in the sex, gender, culture war. Thank you.
Christine George.
Thank you.
Good evening. In November, we learned that our
Sorry, if you
11
could do name and
Oh,
address.
sorry.
No worries.
I'm Christine George, 8390 Sunnydale Drive. In November, we learned that our 11-year-old son would be given an emotional survey. He wanted to feel included with his classmates and asked if he could take the survey as well. We agreed to consider it if we could screen the questions first. Ohio law protects parents' rights to promptly see any survey questions given to their child. 3 levels of school administration would not let us see the questions until after 3 months of asking, after the survey was already administered. We looked deeper. Survey questions from other districts included, how often have you had sex? Are you comfortable talking about racism with your classmates? How do you sexually identify? These are upsetting to me as a parent because I really care about protecting my child's heart and innocence. As a concerned parent, I want to know who gets to see our children's answers to these personal questions. How is their mental health information protected from outside agencies or other individuals? Are financial incentives given to our school for conducting these surveys? Are counseling sessions given to children if their survey answers are concerning? And is it done behind parents' backs? Over the next few weeks, I ask you to consider this. If transparency is restored in our schools, then there is the opportunity for a new beginning, rebuilding trust and partnership. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephanie Baca.
Hey, hi, my name is Stephanie Baca. I reside at 567 Cornell Drive in Broadview Heights. I really wish I didn't have to be here today, but I come to you as a concerned parent. I have a daughter in the middle school, and based on the two previous speakers, I have concerns as well for her and for the children. And I come to you today only because I want to protect children and not because of my personal, religious, or any other beliefs. Today is just about protecting children. And so please accept this correspondence as a formal request pursuant to the Ohio Sunshine Laws for the following records: school club formation documents for the Gender Sexuality Alliance Club at the high school and middle school if it exists, including the name of the staff moderator of this club and any list of internal or outside organization presenters to the school club. Also, a list of all resources available for student club members and club resource materials, including websites, etc., that have been shared with or distributed to non-member students. A copy of the district's or other individual schools' gender transition plan or policy, either under this name or under a similar name, with which provides the district's or individual schools' protocol concerning a student with gender dysphoria or a student who is suspected to have gender dysphoria. 3, regarding teacher and staff training at BBHCSD, names of third-party contractors, if any, conducting training that includes gender identity and or sexual orientation, and copies of instructional materials, including manuals, guides, training assignments, and presentations, and bidding of said contracts. And finally, 4, a copy of the contract and all correspondences between the district and the third-party contracted social emotional screening student survey company, ABRA or ABRA, not sure how to pronounce that. And so this evening, a copy of this will be emailed to all of you, and I just appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could also include Mr. Yanaglos on that, because he handles public records requests. Thank you.
That's all.
Okay. Okay, we're going to move on with our agenda. Item 9, superintendent's other business. Item A, administrative guidelines. Resolve to approve the updated administrative guidelines as attached. Item B, resolve to approve the administrative salary schedule as attached. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Joelle, you want to walk us through what we're?
Yeah, so item A is just our administrative guidelines. We cleaned them up. We had removed some positions that no longer exist in the district and added some new positions. And the salary schedule also is reflective of those same changes, adding some positions that we did not have before that we've currently added now.
Okay. Questions or comments?
No.
Roll call.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mrs. Kwiatkowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Mack,
Yes.
Mrs. Wigman,
Yes.
Mr. Dosen.
Yes. Item 10, superintendent's personnel recommendations. Item A, resolve to approve certified personnel recommendations. Item B, resolve to approve classified personnel recommendations. Item C, resolve to approve superintendent's personnel consent items A through B. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions on any of the recommendations? And if not, I will have some comments after your vote.
Any comments or questions?
No.
Roll call.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mrs. Kwiatkowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Mack,
Yes.
Mrs. Wigman,
Yes.
Mr. Dosen.
Yes.
I'd like to introduce to the board 3 new members of our team that will be starting with us in the fall. First is Sydney McKay. She is coming to us as a special ed supervisor. She's going to be really working with our elementary school. She is currently working at PEP, but through the ESC. So we'd like to welcome Sydney. And Sydney, if you want to say hello and then introduce who you brought with you.
Hi, I'm Sydney, obviously, and this is my husband, Tyler.
Hi, welcome.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome.
Next, I'd like to introduce Brian Koss and his family. How sweet, the baby stayed so quiet. I can't believe it. Brian was the facilities and worked for facilities and grounds for being promoted to the director of operations with Beechwood City Schools. So we're glad to steal him away. If you want to introduce yourself and your family.
Hello, I'm Brian Koss. This is my wife, Missy, my son Ethan and my daughter Emerson down here sleeping. Just looking forward to the next chapter with Brexville Broadview Heights.
Welcome.
Wonderful, yeah.
No comment
congratulations.
about being a
Welcome aboard.
boomerang? No comment about being a boomerang, sir?
I am an alumni and I actually live in Brexville Broadview, well, Brexville. I'm happy for them to be going to this school district.
Welcome back.
Board.
Good.
And
Welcome
last but
aboard.
not least, we'd like to introduce Tyler Erickson. He is coming to us from North Royalton, so we stole him too. So we're very excited about that. He is going to be our new bus mechanic. So we're very had bus mechanic. So we're excited to see him. So
Excellent.
Tyler, if you want to stand up.
Tyler, I appreciate the opportunity. I'm looking forward to being.
Great.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Great.
Welcome on board.
Congratulations,
Thank you.
welcome. Welcome aboard.
Awesome.
All right, item E, resolve to approve supplemental personnel recommendations. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions about any of the recommendations?
Just a comment, when we're talking about our policy, or about certifications, it'd be really great for the board to look at what these people are making when we apply $250, if that's what it in fact costs for them to get certified, and some of these people are making $1,000 for their coaching job, so just consider that, please, when we have that conversation.
Sure. If we could also maybe get a sense of what other districts do.
Yeah.
You know, like everybody's got to deal with this. So I don't, is there a standard? Does everybody just do something, do their own thing? So that would be helpful.
We're going to do that.
Thank you.
This changed?
What changed? The rule or the
What we're voting on right now?
No, it's, she was talking about the policy. for
she's talking about how the
certification.
policy would relate.
No, the certification policy, I
Okay.
just want everybody to look at salaries.
Yeah. All right. I got confused.
Sorry
It's
about
okay.
that.
No, it was me. It's not you.
Any other comments or questions?
No.
Roll call.
Mrs. Kramer,
Yes.
Mrs. Kwiatkowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Mack,
Yes.
Mrs. Wigman,
Yes.
Mr. Dosen.
Yes. Item 11, treasurer's consent agenda. Item A, resolve to approve financial reports as attached. Item B, resolve to accept donations as presented. Item C, resolve to approve the minutes from the February 22nd regular board meeting as attached. Item D, resolve to approve the treasurer's consent items A through C. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Oopsies first. Okay, so just real quick, I will go through, where is it at? There it is. Okay, so our February numbers came in. Let me get a little closer. Let's get that out of the way. Our February numbers came in. We received $15 million this month for our real estate, $365,000 for our state aid that came in, and a total of a little over $15 million in total revenues that we received. On the expenditure side, I had to move these months because we had a little timing issue. We sort of accidentally posted the first payroll in March into February. So March is slated to be a 3-pay month for us. But it kind of looks like February is. So that'll be reflected in whatever. It'll all kind of wash out in March anyways. Mrs. Dickout got a little too excited to post that before we were really into March because she had payroll done so early, which was actually good, but it kind of messed up the month of which the expenditures occurred, but not a big deal. So that's why it shows that it's much higher in February of $4 million. We do have a higher amount for benefits. That's because the month of March, the first pay in March is our supplemental pay. So we pay our supplementals. So we've got more SCRS, STRS that comes out, which is why it's also elevated on the benefits line. Purchase services at $270,000, $37,000 in supplies for a total of $5.7 million. So for this month, we technically made a net profit on the month for $9.5 million. This does kind of, as I was working out the rest of the year, it does put us very close. The column here in like a light orange or salmon shows where we should finish. And this is the forecast in blue. So we're basically negative $1,800 from the forecast, which basically is spot on at this point. So again, we'll continue to update this as we go. As we compare last year's revenues to this year's revenue, we are slightly elevated from last year. And again, why? We do have a slight increase in real estate in fiscal 23 over fiscal 22. That was to be expected. And we did receive a little bit more money in state aid this year than we did last year. On the expenditure side, as you can see, we're way above expenditures over last year. And again, that's because of that payroll, which is really the first one in March. So salaries, well, I forgot to update that. So I will update that. That was from last month. The overall picture, though, is right here, where we have slightly unfavorable on the revenue side as a whole for the year and slightly favorable on the expenditure side. And again, it would leave us with a $468,000 profit for the year, which would increase our cash balance to $23 million. If all would go according to plan, not that I want to be a bearer of bad news, but this would be the last year we would be in the positive. Next year, we would be slated to deficit spend and see our cash balance begin to decrease. And then finally, as we compare revenues of 22 to 23 in green and blue, we're slightly under what we had received at this point last year. Again, if you remember, we did get that large payment last year from the state side. We got a huge lump sum in January, which kind of threw the fiscal 22 now above fiscal 23. And again, on the expenditure side, we are more this year versus last year, because again, that same thing with the payroll has posted. So all in all, things are looking good and going according to plan with the forecast. And we'll continue to monitor it. We will have the update for the forecast in May at the May 24th board meeting. And hopefully we'll have a little bit more news as it relates to House Bill 1 at that point, even though that won't really be passed until possibly the end of June, sorry. And then we'll also see what's going on with fair school funding. So we would benefit slightly from fair school funding, but it depends. They're tossing back a lot of different ideas with how fair school funding will apply. There's been rumors on the table that they would accelerate it and fully phase in the fair school funding model as of next year. But what has become more important to treasurers and fiscal officers around the state is that the problem with our fair school funding is that they've updated some of the inputs, but they're refusing at this point to update what's called the base cost of what the cost to employ people is, and they're using fiscal 18 data. So that's a long time ago at this point. We've gone through high inflation, lots of salary increases, and those are the numbers that they're using to dictate what the base cost is in fair school funding. So the push right now is to get them to update the inputs of fair school funding to fiscal 22. They're maybe thinking about fiscal 20 as a compromise, which still I don't think is adequate, especially when you talk about that being the beginning and part of the pandemic. So anyways, we'll kind of stay tuned with how fair school funding pans out as well. So that'll become more to the forefront as we go through the next month or so, as they kind of go through those hearings, which are currently going on now. Donations are here, and obviously the minutes. So we did have some decent amount of donations that came in this month. So we're very grateful for those donations that did come in. Any other questions?
No. Selecting 18 because that's when they first came up with the, yeah,
When they first came out
it's
with the
kind
plan.
of laziness almost.
Yes.
I don't know if it's laziness or realizing that it costs a lot.
It would cost more money.
Go 5 years ago as your basis point.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Roll call.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Kwiatkowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes.
Mrs. Wigman?
Yes.
Mr. Dosen?
Yes. Item 12, announcements. Our next regular meeting of the Board of Education is scheduled for April 26th, 2023, I think.
Oops. Yep.
Oh,
Unless
yes,
we're
it
going
is.
to go back in time. Item B, resolve to adjourn the meeting. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Kwiatkowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes.
Mrs. Wigman?
Yes.
Mr. Dosen?
Yes. Thank you all. Have everyone.